Today, we are looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century. So sit back as we go to the USA. Music. Mr. Benjamin Cate kept a small farm just outside the town of Kitty in Maine, where he lived with his wife named Mary and their daughter Martha. Both Benjamin and Mary had grown up in Kaikery, but shortly after their marriage had moved to Boston, where Mr. Cates found work at the FM Homes Furniture Manufacturing Company, earning a steady and reasonable salary. The couple remained in Boston for around 11 years, during which time they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Tragically, their son was often ill and died at a very young age. While living in Boston, Mr. Cates's own health began to decline. The dust-filled environment of his workplace damaged his lungs, and his condition slowly worsened over time. Eventually, his illness became so severe that the family was forced to return to Kaikery. There, they purchased a farm of roughly 20 acres and for several years lived a quiet and largely unremarkable life. As time passed, however, the marriage began to deteriorate. Relations between Mr. and Mrs. Cates grew increasingly strained, and by the late 1870s, Mr. Cates's health had noticeably declined. Rather than bringing the couple closer together, his illness only widened the distance between them. Mrs. Cates became neglectful, appearing indifferent to her husband's suffering. She refused to visit his room or tend to him during his periods of illness, and eventually began sleeping in a separate part of the house altogether. As neighbors and acquaintances became aware of the extent of her neglect, rumors began to circulate throughout the community. It was whispered that she had twice attempted to poison his food, and that Mr. Cates had grown so fearful and suspicious of his wife that he refused to eat anything unless she tasted it first. By September of 1881, Mr. Cates was no longer able to manage the physical demands of farm work. As a result, he hired a laborer named Thomas Barrows to assist him. Mr. Barrows quickly proved himself to be diligent and capable, and beyond ordinary farm duties, he gradually took on responsibility for Mr. Cates's daily care, tending to tasks the ailing farmer could no longer perform. Mr. Barrows remained attentive to Mr. Cates until the very end and was present when he died on Sunday, the 17th of December, 1882. Mrs. Cates, by contrast, had withdrawn herself completely. On the night her husband died, she did not even inquire about his condition, despite knowing he would not survive until morning. His resentment soon spread to anyone who came to the house. The strongest hostility was reserved for Mr. Oscar Blay, the fiancé of Mrs. Barrows's daughter, Martha. Mr. Blay was widely regarded as a young man of excellent character and reputation. Yet, for reasons never clearly explained, Mr. Barrows developed an intense dislike for him. He seized every opportunity to insult and demean the young man, forbade him from entering the house, and ordered his stepdaughter to sever all contact with him. Eventually, the tension erupted into open violence, culminating in a physical altercation between the 2 men at the church they both attended. As a result, Mr. Blay was forced to meet Martha elsewhere, either at his grandfather's home or at locations agreed upon between them. Despite Mr. Barrows's continued opposition and repeated attempts to keep them apart, the relationship endured. Approximately 9 months later, the couple married and settled on a small farm of about 40 acres, roughly a mile and a half from the Barrows residence. It was widely believed that Mr. Barrows's hostility toward Mr. Blay stemmed from concerns over property. Should Mr. Barrows outlive his wife, the farm would pass to her daughter, leaving him with no legal claim. It was said that he urged his wife to deed the property to him, but she steadfastly refused. Mrs. Barrows confided in her daughter and son-in-law about the unhappy state of her marriage and frequently complained of the treatment she received from her husband. Friends and neighbors later recalled hearing her say that she wished something might happen to him or that he might somehow be removed from her life altogether. On Wednesday, the 14th of November, 1883, Mr. Thomas Barrows traveled to Portsmouth on business. As was his custom, he returned to his home in Kittery at around 8 o'clock in the evening. Not long after his arrival, gunshots were heard in the vicinity of the house. Shortly afterward, Mrs. Mary Barrows and her son-in-law, Mr. Oscar Blay, ran to nearby neighbors for help, claiming that Mr. Barrows had shot himself. When those nearby arrived, they found Mr. Barrows lying motionless in his bed. It was immediately clear to everyone present that he was dead. Mrs. Barrows appeared highly distraught and told those gathered that at approximately 8:25 p.m., she had heard shots near the barn. She claimed she ran into the bedroom and looked out the window, where she saw her husband firing a revolver at himself. Speaking in a trembling voice, she said that after several shots his lantern went out and he collapsed to the ground. According to her account, he then crawled from the yard into the house and somehow managed to climb into bed, where he died without uttering a word. She stated that she immediately went to her daughter's house and summoned her son-in-law. When they returned and confirmed that Mr. Barrows was indeed dead, they rushed to seek assistance from the neighbors. Because Mr. Barrows was known to behave strangely at times, many in Kittery were initially inclined to believe that he had taken his own life during a moment of mental disturbance. His funeral was held without delay, and his body was buried. However, doubts soon began to surface among those familiar with the household. Several neighbors, aware of the troubled marriage, questioned whether a man suffering such severe gunshot wounds could have crawled such a distance and lifted himself into bed unaided. These suspicions refused to fade. Questions arose as to why no official inquiry had been conducted, and eventually the coroner ordered that the body be exhumed so a post-mortem examination could take place. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Potter, revealed 5 bullet wounds. 3 were relatively minor. 1 to the right calf, 1 grazing the outer edge of the left hip, and another grazing the right leg. A 4th shot had shattered the right hip, while the 5th had lodged in the brain, having first grazed the right arm, as though Mr. Barrows had raised it to shield his face. Dr. Potter concluded that it would have been impossible for a man to inflict such injuries upon himself or to crawl from the barn to the house and then climb into bed unaided. In his professional opinion, the shooting must have taken place inside the house, with Mr. Barrows either seated or lying on the bed. Following these findings, District Attorney Higgins, High Sheriff Gell, and Deputy Sheriff Bikesham took charge of the case. Dr. Potter's conclusions were presented to Mrs. Barrows, and the inconsistencies in her account were pointed out. Nevertheless, she continued to insist that her version of the events was true. When authorities questioned her son-in-law, Oscar Blay, he provided a similar account. He stated that he knew nothing of the incident until Mrs. Barrows summoned him, claiming that her husband had shot himself. Neighbors confirmed that Mr. Blay had not left his home that evening until he was called. Despite continued efforts by local authorities to uncover the truth of what had occurred that night, progress was slow. Eventually, District Attorney Higgins telegraphed the Boston police force for assistance, and detectives were soon dispatched to the scene. When detectives arrived in Kittery to follow up on the case and interviewed Mrs. Barrows, she repeated the story she had already told. Crucially, however, she now added further details. This time, she claimed that she had heard gunshots near the stable and went to her bedroom, where she looked out of the window and saw her husband lying on the ground. She said that she then went immediately into the front hall, left the house, and walked along the road until she reached her son-in-law's home. According to her account, she found him sitting by the fire having just taken off his shoes and asked him to come at once. On the way back, she told him that her husband had shot himself and was in a very bad state. She then claimed that when they arrived, her son-in-law entered her husband's bedroom, where Mr. Barrows was sitting on the bed. Because there had been bad feeling between them, she alleged that her son-in-law shot her husband twice more, and that it was these shots that finally killed him. The following morning, Mrs. Barrows was taken to Mr. Blay's residence, where detective would question the young man. After only a few questions, he broke down, hid his face in his hands, and began to weep. When asked whether Mrs. Barrows' story was true, he wiped away his tears and said in a trembling voice, "I guess most of it is." He then gave a detailed account of the events. Mr. Blay began by describing his long-standing conflicts with his stepfather-in-law, whom he said had repeatedly tried to bar him from the house. He spoke of their constant quarrels and of what he believed was Mrs. Barrows's desire to be rid of her husband. He stated that, On that night, he finally resolved to put him out of the way. Expanding on his confession, Mr. Blay told detectives that on the Saturday before the murder, he traveled to Dover, New Hampshire, where he purchased a 5-shot double-action revolver. He initially bought 1 cartridge and later purchased 6 more at Wendell's store in Portsmouth, giving him a total of 7. He further stated that on the afternoon of the murder, while returning home, he encountered his stepfather-in-law on a bridge. Mr. Barrows did not recognize him, a slight that Mr. Blay said wounded him deeply. Later that evening, on the 14th of November, he walked toward his mother-in-law's house and fired 1 shot to test whether the revolver worked. Mr. Blay said he then hid in a shed next to the barn. When Mr. Barrows came out of the house, carrying a lantern to feed the animals, he fired at him. According to his account, Mr. Barrows dropped the lantern, which went out, and in his own terror, Mr. Blay dropped the revolver and ran home. He added that when his mother-in-law later came to find him, he returned with her to the house, searched through the grass, and recovered the gun. Now, visibly distressed, he said that he loaded 2 more cartridges and went inside, where he saw Mr. Barrows sitting on the edge of the bed, groaning in pain. Mr. Blay stated that Mr. Barrows looked at him and said, "Oscar, I think I'm going soon." He claimed that he replied, "Your time has come now," and fired. He told detectives that the bullet shattered Mr. Barrows's hip, and when the injured man raised his arm as if to shield his face, he fired again. This second shot passed through the forearm and into the brain, killing him instantly. When asked what he did next, Mr. Blay said that he walked out through the back door and threw the revolver beneath the sheds where he had first hidden it. Afterward, he and Mrs. Barrows went to the neighbors, telling them that Mr. Barrows had shot himself. Following this confession, Oscar Blay was charged with deliberately shooting Mr. Barrows with intent to kill, while Mrs. Barrows was charged as an accessory before and after the fact. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the case became the subject of intense discussion throughout the community, with speculation running high about what the proceedings would uncover. The trial opened on Tuesday, the 29th of January, 1884. Counsel for Mrs. Barrows applied for a separate trial, but the request was denied. Both Mrs. Barrows and Mr. Blay entered pleas of not guilty. The witnesses included those who had known Thomas Barrows, individuals who had seen him returning home on the 14th of November, neighbors who viewed the body after the shooting, and the clerks who had sold the revolver and cartridges. Dr. Potter and Dr. Gordon both testified, stating that, in their opinion, the fatal wound could not have been self-inflicted and that Mr. Barrows must have been shot by another person. Mrs. Barrows continued to maintain her innocence despite being implicated by her son-in-law's statements. Her position was severely weakened, however, when Oscar Blay changed his plea to guilty. The character of the young man was then placed before the court. It was explained that Oscar Blay was the adopted son of Frank Blay and that his biological father, James Forrester, had been stationed at the Kittery Naval Yard and was said to have suffered from mental illness. Oscar's mother had died when he was very young, after which he was taken into the Blay household and raised as their own. Before her death, Mrs. Blay had urged her husband to leave Oscar the family property, a wish that Mr. Blay later fulfilled when Oscar married Miss Cates. The court also heard testimony regarding the strained relations between Mr. Blay and his Kitty to follow up on the case, and when they interviewed Mrs. Barrows, she repeated the story that she had already told, but crucially added some additional information. Now she claimed that she had heard gunshots near the stable, so she went to her bedroom and looked out of the window where she saw her husband lying on the ground, and, following this, she immediately went into the front hall, left the house, and walked along the road until she reached her son-in-law's home. She said she found him sitting by the fire, having just taken off his shoes, and asked him to come with her to the house. On the way, she told him that her husband had shot himself and was in a very bad condition. When they arrived, her son-in-law went into her husband's bedroom, where he was sitting on the bed, because there had long been bad feeling between them. She claimed that her son-in-law then shot her. husband twice more, and this time he died. The next morning, Mrs. Barrows was taken to Mr. Blaine's, where Detective Wood spoke to the young man. After only a few questions, he broke down, hiding his face in his hands. When asked whether Mrs. Barrows' story was true, he wiped away his tears and said in a trembling voice, "I guess most of it is." He then gave a detailed account of the tragedy. Mr. Blay began by describing at length his conflicts with his stepfather-in-law, whom he claimed had repeatedly tried to keep him out of the house. He spoke of their constant quarrels and of what he believed was Mrs. Barrows's desire to be rid of her husband. He said that night he finally resolved to put him out of the way. Adding further detail, he told detectives that the Saturday before the murder he went to New Hampshire, where he bought a 5-shot double-action revolver. He purchased 1 cartridge at the time and later bought 6 more at Wendell's store in Portsmouth, giving him 7 in total. On the afternoon of the murder, while returning home, he encountered his stepfather-in-law on the bridge, but Mr. Barrows did not recognize him, something that deeply hurt him. He said that on the 14th of November he walked toward his mother-in-law's house and fired 1 shot to test whether the revolver worked. Mr. Blay said he hid in a shed beside the barn, and when Mr. Barrows came out of the house carrying a lantern to feed the animals, he fired at him. He said Mr. Barrows dropped the lantern, which went out, and in terror he himself dropped the revolver and ran home. He added that when his mother-in-law came to find him, he returned with her to the house, searched through the grass, and found the gun. Sounding very distressed, he said he loaded 2 more cartridges and went inside, where he saw Mr. Barrows on the edge of the bed, groaning in pain. He said Mr. Barrows looked at him and said, "Oscar, I think I'm going soon to," which Oscar replied, "Your time has come now," before firing. He told detectives the bullet shattered Mr. Barrows's hip, and as the injured man raised his arm as if to shield his face, he fired again. This time, the bullet passed through the forearm and into his brain, killing him instantly. When detectives asked what he did next, he said he walked out through the back door and threw the revolver under the sheds where he had first hidden it. He and Mrs. Barrows then notified the neighbors, telling them that Mr. Barrows had shot himself. Following this confession, Oscar Blay was charged with deliberately shooting Mr. Barrows with intent to kill, and Mrs. Barrows was charged as an accessory before and after the fact. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the case became the subject of widespread talk and excitement in the community, with speculation running high about what the proceedings would reveal. The trial opened on Tuesday, the 29th of January, 1884. Counsel for Mrs. Barrows applied for a separate trial, but the request was refused. Both defendants pleaded not guilty. Witnesses included those who knew Thomas Barrows, people who had seen him returning home on the 14th of November, neighbors who saw the body after the shooting, and staff who had sold the gun and cartridges. Doctors Potter and Gordon testified that the fatal wound could not have been self-inflicted and that someone else must have shot him. Mrs. Barrows continued to maintain her innocence despite being implicated by Oscar Blay. Her claim was weakened, however, when her son-in-law later changed his plea to guilty. The court then heard about Oscar Blay's background, his troubled family history, and the strained relationship between him and Mr. Barrows. The prosecution argued that Mrs. Mary Barrows was the central figure behind the crime, carefully planning the shooting and manipulating her son-in-law into carrying it out while intending that he would bear the blame. After 6 days of trial and 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found both Mrs. Mary Barrows and Oscar Blay guilty of murder, and both were sentenced to death. Later appeals resulted in their sentences being commuted, though tragedy continued. to follow the family for years afterward. Oscar Blay eventually died by his own hand in prison in 1895, while Mrs. Barrows lived many years longer, dying in state prison in 1916 at the age of 74. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you again in the next brief case.